What is the legacy of a homeless teenager? Let me tell you the story of two young women who found themselves in a homeless shelter. We'll call them Jackie and Sharon. They are one of hundreds of teenagers in our community and 1.2 million nationwide that we consider the hidden homeless. Jackie and Sharon shared a lot in common. They both grew up in high-poverty communities. Their father was absent. Their mother was in and out for whatever reason. They were behind academically, both in achievement and grade level. They had suffered serious trauma. They had been in and out of homelessness, but yet somehow they had slipped through Child Protective Services, and they found themselves in a teenage homeless shelter. I learned of Jackie's story when I met her mother as she was dropping off some donations at our shelter. And I asked her what her connection was. She shared with me the story of Jackie. Jackie had been a homeless teenager in our shelter, and this woman had somehow connected and become her mentor. Jackie was called to juvenile court to figure out what to do with this homeless teenager. And the judge looked at this woman and said, either you take the child or we'll bring her into state custody. The woman, who had already raised two children of her own, took the child into her house, adopted her as her daughter, put in all the necessary academic, psychological, social supports this child needed. She graduated on time and currently serves our country as a member of the U.S. military. What a legacy. Consider essentially the same child, Sharon. Sharon is 14 years old and slated to go into the 6th grade again. Now, the 6th grade is no place for a 14-year-old, and the last place this 14-year-old wants to be is in the 6th grade and in a homeless shelter. We realize she's going to be with us for a little bit longer, so we're able to put in some additional supports. We hook her up with an individual tutor, and for the first time probably in her life, she has one-on-one instruction explaining math and reading. We're starting to see some progress. We put her in a different academic environment so she can quickly accelerate to catch up with her peers. We hook her up with a girls' empowerment group to give her a peer support group. Sharon goes to court, and the judge places Sharon with her elderly grandmother, an elderly grandmother who does not want to be raising a 14-year-old in the 6th grade and placing a 14-year-old with an elderly grandmother. We never hear from the family or the child again. Westmore writes about this disparity in his book, The Other Westmore. Westmore is a Rhodes Scholar, he's a decorated veteran, and he returns to his inner city Baltimore community where he grew up. He reads in the paper about a guy named Westmore who's just been convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. And Westmore, the veteran, the Rhodes Scholar, he chronicles the lives of these two Westmore who grew up at the same time in the same neighborhood, just blocks from one another. And he writes, the chilling truth is that his story could have been mine. The tragedy is that my story could have been his. When I practiced criminal defense, I saw the same types of disparities in the clients I represented. Some people had been able to escape homelessness and poverty, others had not, and they had grown up in poverty, their parents had been in and out, they had experienced bouts of homelessness, they started with petty juvenile crimes that quickly escalated to serious felonies and found themselves in federal court. How do we account for these disparate outcomes for our most vulnerable youth? Is it policy? Is it community? Is it government? Are we okay chalking it up to luck or strength or lack thereof of the human spirit? Let me tell you a little bit about the hidden homeless, the homeless teenagers in our community. They're not all sleeping on a park bench or on a bridge, although some of them are. But they're transitionally homeless. They're on a sofa one week, they're in a car the next week, they're in the shelter the next week. They have no place to call home, and they're throughout our community. In our school district of 38,000 students, 1,045 students this year in our community have been identified as homeless, 3% of our public school population. Consider with me a high school class of 30 students, ages 13 to 17. Of those 30 students, 1 in 30 will experience homelessness from the age of 13 to 17, one person per classroom. As teens get older and become young adults, the numbers become even more staggering. Picture with me a pickup basketball game of 10 people, age 18 to 25. Of those 10 young adults, 1 out of 10 will experience homelessness during that age of 18 to 25. But what we see as homelessness, we identify as other things. It will come as no surprise to you that homeless teenagers in school are tardy or absent. They're tired, their heads are on the desk, they're hungry, they have disruptive behaviors, they're not turning in homework assignments. But instead of treating the underlying symptoms of homelessness, we tend to punish those traits rather than addressing the underlying problem. So what do we do? Here is what we know. We know that education matters. Just this fall, a revolutionary study came out from the University of Chicago, and they found that for students who do not have a high school diploma or a GED, they have a nearly 350% chance of experiencing homelessness as adults. That's a staggering number. It is key that we get kids across the graduation stage. But as you might suspect, that is harder to do with a homeless teen population. We had a child come into our shelter who, by all accounts, had a relatively normal upbringing. He was doing fine academically, he didn't have any discipline problems, and his mother unexpectedly was experiencing homelessness, and she placed her 2 sons into our shelter. The next day at school, this kid who had really no problems at all got into a fight and was suspended 2 weeks. That's the symptoms of homelessness that we're punishing as something else. Another family came into our shelter, a woman who had escaped domestic violence. She'd essentially gone undercover for 2 weeks and emerged at our shelter, seeking help and assistance. I talked to the 3 children there and just trying to make conversation. How's school going? At this point, we were 3 or 4 weeks into the school year, but the children had not been enrolled. Because when survival is the priority, academics take us back seat. The second thing we know is that safe, affordable housing is essential. You don't need me to get up here and tell you how important stability and well-being is for a teenager. But yet eviction rates are on the rise, and in our community alone, we have a waiting list of 15,000 people on the wait list for affordable housing. The free market does not create affordable housing. Government, policy, and community creates affordable housing. The third thing we know about this population of homeless teenagers is that trauma matters. We partnered with a mediation center to work with our kids on conflict resolution, and the facilitator asked the kids, how many of y'all have experienced trauma? And they looked around one another, shook their heads no. Then he asked, how many of you either have a close family member or a relative who's been a victim of gun violence? And nearly every hand shot up. Children in the homeless community are experiencing trauma on a regular basis, but to them it is reality. When I talk to our house parents who've been working with homeless teenagers for the past 15 years, they talk about the problems and the issues that our homeless teenagers are bringing today that weren't there 15 years ago when maybe Johnny ran away from home and we were able to reunite the family. There's psychological and psychiatric issues that make these issues much more complex. Another problem in our homeless teenager community is the issue of survival sex, or essentially trading sex for shelter, for clothing, for food. And again, these young victims don't even realize that they're the victims of exploitation and trafficking. And this is happening in our community. The fourth thing we know is that adults matter. And we talk a lot in education sectors and in parenting sectors about parental involvement. And that's an easy word to say, to put the blame on someone else. But the reality is, not all parents, particularly parents who have found themselves in a homeless situation, are able to provide the adult stability that these kids need. On the school board, we review discipline issues. And my very first school board meeting, when I was a very green-eyed school board member, we had an issue where the mother had driven the daughter to a gang fight to redeem her name. So parental involvement is up for all of us as adults. These kids have giant dreams. They want to have very normal, typical teenage experiences. They want to go to the prom. They want to go to the beach. They want to graduate from high school. They have big dreams, but they need adults to show them the way, because not always are their parents able to do that. So while I don't mean to bring everyone down, I do want to leave you with a few ways that you can get involved and help. The first is awareness. Help us uncover the story of our hidden homeless teenagers. Because our hidden homeless teenagers, if they don't get our assistance, if they don't get our help, they will end up homeless as adults or worse off. The second thing I need you to do is advocate for safe, affordable, accessible housing for all of our community. And then finally, I need us to be the adults and to provide example and mentorship and opportunities for these youth. These are good kids in bad situations with no place to call home. And with our help, we can change their legacy. Thank you.